On February 23, 2026, Burkina Faso's defense minister, Major General Célestin Simporé, sat in Tehran with his Iranian counterpart discussing military cooperation and arms deals. 5 days later, the United States and Israel killed Iran's supreme leader in airstrikes that also wiped out 7 senior defense officials and decimated Iran's command structure. And right now, Burkina Faso's potential military cooperation with Iran is at risk of never happening. Burkina Faso's outreach to Iran started accelerating in late 2023, driven by Traoré's determination to find security partners who were not France, not the United States, and not European. When he seized power through a coup in September 2022, Traoré inherited a country where roughly 40% of territory sat outside government control, where jihadist groups linked to al-Qaeda and ISIS were killing thousands of civilians annually, and where over 2 million people had been displaced from their homes. The previous government, which had relied heavily on French military support, had failed to stop the violence. Traoré's solution was to kick France out entirely and find new partners willing to provide weapons, training, and support without the political conditions that came with Western aid. In January 2023, Traoré ordered France to withdraw all of its roughly 400 special operations soldiers within 1 month. By February, French forces were gone. Traoré expelled France's ambassador, terminated bilateral defense agreements, and made clear that decades of French military presence in Burkina Faso had ended. But ejecting France created an immediate vacuum that needed filling, and Traoré moved fast to bring in alternatives. Russia became the most visible replacement, reopening its embassy in Ouagadougou after closing it in 1992, and deploying roughly 2,000 fighters from what was initially Wagner Group and later became the state-controlled Africa Corps. Turkey provided drones and military equipment. China elevated bilateral relations to a strategic partnership in 2024 and delivered over 100 armored vehicles. Iran entered the picture more quietly, but with specific strategic value. In September 2024, Burkina Faso signed a memorandum of understanding with Iran's Atomic Energy Organization to cooperate on nuclear research and training, signaling Ouagadougou's interest in developing a civilian nuclear program. In November 2023, Iran's ambassador met with Burkina Faso's foreign minister to discuss expanding defense ties, including arms exports, maintenance, and security training. Ahmadreza Radan, the commander of Iran's police force, visited Burkina Faso to boost policing cooperation. Then came the high-level defense meeting on February 23, 2026, where Iranian Defense Minister Brigadier General Aziz Nasserzadeh hosted Major General Simporé in Tehran. That meeting revealed the ideological dimension driving the relationship beyond just transactional arms deals. Nasserzadeh described the revolutions in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali as popular movements against colonial policies, framing the alliance of Sahel states' governments as part of a global anti-imperialist struggle that perfectly matched Iran's own revolutionary narrative. Simporé expressed sympathy with the Iranian people and honored those killed in what he called resistance against imperialist domination. The language was deliberately chosen to signal that Burkina Faso and Iran saw themselves as fighting the same enemies. Western powers trying to maintain control over countries that had formally gained independence decades ago, but never achieved true sovereignty. Then came February 28th, and everything changed. The United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, deploying over 200 warplanes to hit more than 500 targets across Iran in coordinated strikes designed to decapitate the Iranian government and cripple its military infrastructure. The operation killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who had ruled Iran for 36 years, along with his daughter, son-in-law, grandchild, daughter-in-law, and at least 7 senior Iranian defense and intelligence officials who were meeting with him when the strikes hit his compound. The attacks targeted nuclear facilities, military command centers, and Revolutionary Guard installations with precision that demonstrated how deeply Israeli and American intelligence had penetrated Iran's security apparatus. Iran's response showed both its capabilities and its limitations. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched retaliatory strikes on 27 bases, hosting US troops across the region, and hit Israeli military facilities in Tel Aviv. Explosions were reported in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Iran declared 40 days of national mourning and a 7-day public holiday. But the damage had already been done. Iran's chain of command was shattered. The country entered a succession crisis as the Assembly of Experts scrambled to select a new supreme leader while dealing with ongoing military pressure from Israel and the United States. Inside Iran, the reaction split between tens of thousands mourning in Tehran, Mashhad and Qam, and crowds celebrating in Isfahan, Karaj, Kermanshah, and other cities where people toppled statues of Khamenei and set off fireworks. For Burkina Faso, the strikes created four immediate problems that fundamentally changed what the Iran relationship could deliver. The first problem is capacity. Before February 28th, Iran could credibly offer arms sales, military training, intelligence sharing, and potentially direct military assistance if Burkina Faso needed it. After the strikes, Iran is fighting for its own survival, dealing with a leadership crisis and facing sustained military pressure from two of the world's most powerful militaries. The idea that Iran can spare weapons, trainers, or resources to support counterinsurgency operations in the Sahel when it cannot secure its own leadership or territory is completely unrealistic. Iran's ability to project power abroad has been reduced to proxy militias it already had in place before the strikes, and even those groups are now operating with reduced coordination and support. The second problem is sanctions. Iran faces comprehensive US and European sanctions targeting its financial system, energy exports, and military acquisitions. Any country that deepens military or economic ties with Iran risks secondary sanctions, where the United States penalizes third parties for doing business with sanctioned entities. For Burkina Faso, which depends heavily on gold exports and already operates on thin economic margins, getting caught in the US sanctions regime could devastate what little economic stability the country has left. Chinese companies doing business in Burkina Faso might pull back if they see Ouagadougou getting too close to Tehran. Turkish firms providing drones and equipment could face pressure to choose between Burkina Faso and maintaining access to Western markets. European mining companies still operating in Burkina Faso would almost certainly exit rather than risk sanctions exposure. The third problem is intelligence scrutiny. The February 28th strikes demonstrated that the United States and Israel possess detailed, real-time intelligence on Iran's leadership movements, meeting schedules, security protocols, and infrastructure vulnerabilities. If Burkina Faso continues deepening ties with Iran, every communication between Ouagadougou and Tehran, every arms shipment, every Iranian advisor who arrives in Burkina Faso becomes part of an intelligence network that Israeli and American agencies are actively monitoring and potentially targeting. That creates operational security risks for Traoré's government, which has already survived at least 5 coup attempts since taking power. Opening channels with Iran means opening vulnerabilities that hostile intelligence services can exploit, either by gathering information on Burkina Faso's military capabilities or by identifying individuals and networks that could be targeted for disruption. The fourth problem is regional isolation. Burkina Faso already withdrew from ECOWAS in January 2024, along with Mali and Niger, forming the alliance of Sahel states as an alternative regional bloc. Neighboring countries like Côte d'Ivoire, which Traoré publicly accuses of plotting to destabilize his regime, are watching these moves closely and responding with their own countermeasures. Ghana and Senegal, both of which initially tried to maintain ties with the AES states, are not going to appreciate Burkina Faso aligning with a country actively at war with the United States. If regional powers decide that Burkina Faso's Iran relationship threatens stability, they can increase support for Traoré's domestic opponents, tighten border controls, restrict trade, and coordinate with Western intelligence agencies to monitor or disrupt the partnership. So what can Burkina Faso actually do at this point? The first option is to quietly freeze the Iran relationship while maintaining face-saving rhetoric about solidarity. That means no major arms deals, no Iranian military trainers deployed to Burkina Faso, no joint operations, and limiting the partnership to symbolic gestures like diplomatic statements and low-level, technical cooperation on things like nuclear research that do not trigger immediate sanctions. The advantages are clear: reduced sanctions risk, less intelligence exposure, less regional backlash, and more flexibility to maintain relationships with Russia, Turkey, and China without forcing those partners to choose between Burkina Faso and avoiding US penalties. The disadvantage is equally clear. Burkina Faso looks weak and opportunistic, courting Iran when it seemed useful and abandoning the relationship the moment it became costly. Traoré's entire political brand is built on defying Western pressure and pursuing an independent foreign policy. Walking back the Iran partnership after publicly offering military assistance undermines that brand and makes future commitments less credible. The second option is strategic neutrality, treating Iran as one partner among many, without prioritizing the relationship or letting it dominate Burkina Faso's foreign policy. Ouagadougou could continue some cooperation on civilian nuclear research, policing training, and low-level diplomatic engagement, while making clear that it will not join Iran's fight against Israel and the United States. The advantage is flexibility. Burkina Faso keeps options open with multiple partners, Russia, Turkey, China, and even potentially limited Western engagement, without getting locked into a single alignment that brings disproportionate risks. The disadvantage is that strategic neutrality satisfies nobody. Iran wants committed allies who will stand with Tehran when it matters, not fair-weather friends who hedge their bets. Russia and China want reliable partners they can count on, not governments that shift positions based on immediate circumstances. And Western countries are unlikely to invest in rebuilding relationships with a government that maintains any level of Iran ties, even reduced ones. The third option is to double down, continuing the Iran partnership despite heightened risks and using it as proof of Burkina Faso's commitment to resisting Western pressure. That means following through on Traoré's offer to provide military assistance if Iran requests it, accepting Iranian arms and advisors despite sanctions threats, and framing the relationship as part of a global struggle against imperialism that transcends immediate tactical calculations. The advantage is ideological consistency and credibility with other governments and movements that define themselves in opposition to Western power. Burkina Faso becomes a symbol of resistance, a country willing to stand with allies, even when doing so brings enormous costs. The disadvantage is that those costs are real and potentially catastrophic. Comprehensive sanctions that cripple an already fragile economy, intelligence targeting that could facilitate coup attempts or assassinations, regional isolation that cuts off trade routes and cross-border cooperation, and the very real possibility that Iran collapses or fundamentally changes following Khamenei's death, leaving Burkina Faso tied to a partner that no longer exists. The decision is complicated further by Burkina Faso's deteriorating security situation, which is the underlying reason Traoré is seeking new partners in the first place. From January to June 2025 alone, the Sahel region recorded 12,964 conflict-related fatalities in 5,097 incidents, with nearly all deaths occurring in Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Jihadist groups continue expanding territory despite the deployment of Russian Dama fighters and Burkina Faso's recruitment of tens of thousands of homeland defense volunteers. If Russian support has not been enough to turn the tide, and if Iran can no longer provide meaningful assistance because of its own crisis, then Burkina Faso faces a fundamental problem. Where does it turn next? Turkey offers one path. Ankara has provided Bayraktar TB2 drones and military equipment to Burkina Faso and positioned itself as a partner for African countries seeking alternatives to Western and Russian influence. But Turkey is a NATO member with deep economic ties to Europe and the United States. If Burkina Faso gets sanctioned for Iran ties, Turkish companies will face pressure to cut business rather than risk secondary penalties. China represents another possibility, having elevated relations to a strategic partnership and delivered over 100 armored vehicles. But China is pragmatic and focused on protecting its economic interests across Africa and globally. Beijing will not take on the kind of sanctions risk that deep Iran ties create just to support Burkina Faso's ideological positioning. And then there is the question of what happens if Iran's government collapses or fundamentally transforms following Khamenei's death. The Islamic Republic has ruled since 1979, but the succession crisis combined with military defeats and a population deeply divided over the regime creates real possibilities of regime change or prolonged instability. If that happens, governments that aligned with Tehran based on revolutionary ideology suddenly find themselves without the ideological center that justified taking those risks. Burkina Faso would have absorbed all the costs, sanctions exposure, intelligence scrutiny, regional isolation, without receiving any of the promised benefits because the partner state no longer functions or no longer shares the same ideology. What makes this particularly urgent is timing. The next few months will determine whether Iran stabilizes under new leadership or descends into chaos. The Assembly of Experts must select a new supreme leader while dealing with ongoing Israeli and American military operations. The Revolutionary Guard might seize more direct control, which could mean doubling down on proxy support to project strength, or Iran's government could fragment entirely, with different factions competing for power and external actors exploiting the vacuum. Burkina Faso's leadership has to make decisions about the Iran relationship before knowing which of these scenarios will actually play out. Traoré's offer to send military assistance to Iran revealed how far Burkina Faso was willing to go rhetorically, but the practical follow-through will reveal how serious that commitment actually is. If Burkina Faso starts moving weapons or personnel to Iran, that triggers immediate intelligence alerts in Washington, Tel Aviv, Paris, and European capitals. If Burkina Faso quietly backs away from the offer, it preserves flexibility but damages credibility with Iran and other partners, watching to see if Ouagadougou's anti-Western rhetoric translates into action when tested. The broader pattern here extends beyond just Burkina Faso and Iran. The Alliance of Sahel states rejected France and ECOWAS based on the idea that sovereignty meant choosing your own partners and resisting foreign interference. But sovereignty requires capability. Small states trying to navigate between global powers during intense great power competition constantly face a basic problem. The partners you choose might not be able to deliver what they promise, and the risks you take by aligning with them might exceed any benefits you receive. When Russia deployed 2,000 fighters to the Sahel, but violence continued escalating, that demonstrated the limits of what Moscow could provide. When Iran's supreme leader gets killed and the government enters crisis mode, that demonstrates the limits of what Tehran can provide. And when both partners face their own existential challenges, the countries that bet on those relationships find themselves more exposed and isolated than when they started. Burkina Faso now faces a choice that will define Traoré's foreign policy for years to come. The Iran relationship can be frozen, maintained at minimal levels, or expanded despite the risks. Each option brings different costs and different benefits. But what is clear is that the Iran that exists in March 2026, leaderless, under sustained attack, and fighting for survival, cannot deliver the kind of support that Burkina Faso was hoping for when defense ministers met in Tehran on February 23rd, and partnerships built on shared enemies and revolutionary rhetoric only function when both sides can actually act on those commitments. When one side loses that capacity, the relationship becomes a liability that needs to be managed rather than an asset that provides security. Burkina Faso is about to find out which category its Iran partnership falls into.